What do our parents, a wall, and time have in common? Find out today at Beyond and Within Astrology, as it's time to talk about Saturn. Hey, welcome back to Beyond and Within Astrology. We are in the series of the astrological archetypes, and today it is finally time to talk about Saturn. You might have heard of the infamous Saturn Return, and I will talk about the Saturn Return in a different episode in more detail. I will just briefly talk about that in this episode as it's an overview of the archetype of Saturn. Wherever Saturn shows up, there's usually a lot of hard lessons to be learned. Saturn is the archetype of structure, the archetype of limitations, the archetype of setting boundaries and structuring your life, basically. And of course, every time you want to structure something, every time you want to set boundaries to something, that means that you will have to say no to certain things. You will have to put certain things in the inbox and certain things in the outbox. We talked about Jupiter in the last episode, and if you haven't seen that, then definitely check it out. It's going to be up here in the corner, right there. And you can watch that episode first. But as we talked about Jupiter, we said that Jupiter is the planet, an archetype of giving space to things, providing opportunities, and, in creating a space of inclusion, a space of freedom, basically. Well, now here comes Saturn as the second outer planet, and Saturn takes about 3.5 years-ish to 2.5 to 3.5 years time, I believe, in a sign. So it's a little bit of a longer period. And so, for example, we also had a Pluto-Saturn conjunction in 2020, right when COVID was announced to be a worldwide problem in January of 2020, I apologize. We had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and right at the time we started having to limit our freedom. We had to separate each other from each other, 6 feet apart. We had to put on masks. We had to endure lockdowns. And that is an increasing Pluto of the archetype of Saturn, structure and limitations and boundaries, and sometimes even fear. So that is a really good example to understand the archetype of Saturn. Saturn is what's needed in the world to structure things, to make things grow. Everything needs boundaries in order to grow. Where we have Jupiter, we have Sagittarius on the one side, and then we have Pisces on the other. And encased in those two signs are the two signs that Saturn rules, which I will talk about in a few minutes. Jupiter being on both sides, Saturn is almost like a wall that's being put in between the principle of Jupiter, where Jupiter wants to just increase everything and, include everything in this one experience and just merge everything together. Here comes Saturn and just puts this wall, this structure in between and says, no, not everything. There are differences. There needs to be differences and limitations, because otherwise life is not possible. We can't just be one floating thing. We can't just be continually expanding and extending everything. We need to set boundaries here, or life isn't possible. Two people can't be one thing. We can have shared experiences. We can have unifying principles and connections, and there are things that make us on a certain level one, on a quantum physical level, or maybe on a spiritual level. We are somehow one, right? We are one organism, and we are continually expanding, but we also need limitations. The first time we've experienced these limitations, probably consciously, is when we are children and our parents are saying no to us about certain things. You're a child and you want to grab something, or you want to do something, you want to run away, and your parents, if they are taking care of you, or your legal guardian, or whoever you had in your life watching over you, they set limitations. They say no. And as a child, that doesn't feel good. A child is kind of the manifestation of Jupiter, right? The child wants to just do everything, have everything, try everything. And here comes Saturn and says, no, you can't. Because if you do, then life is not possible. We need structure. You can't live in a house without walls, right? Your house is the space where you live. Jupiter. Your house is the space where you unfold yourself and extend your life, and you decorate it, and it's your space. That's the space where you're put to grow. But there is no safe space unless there's limitations and boundaries. Sorry, ignore my cat over here. He doesn't know the boundaries, right? So Saturn is needed, is very needed. Just like Jupiter, just like every archetype that we've talked about so far is important for life. So the first time we experience this archetype is when we have our parents say no, or we have legal authorities say no to us and put boundaries up, or we have our teachers set boundaries, or we run in the house and we realize that a door is closed too late and we run into the door, and we feel that there's boundaries and you can only go so far. That is Saturn. Saturn makes us experience the limitations, the boundaries, the reality that life is not an infinite space, but there are needed limitations. We need protection. We need walls. We need structure. And of course, we need a certain amount of structure, but there's also such a thing as too much structure, right? So that's Saturn. Saturn also is seen in the principle of time, because time is a limitation, right? We only have a certain amount of time every day. And if we spend our time on one thing, then we can't spend it on another. That time is gone. And so Saturn lets us realize that you can only do a certain amount of things in one day until you get tired, until your time runs out, and then ultimately your time will run out when you die. So Saturn is also connected to death. And all these principles can be seen as negatives, but if you really think about them, they're really positive because they really help us to understand how we should live life. It's a very guiding, structuring energy that, if seen the right way, helps us tremendously. And that's where the Saturn return also comes in. The Saturn return, like I said, I would talk briefly about this, but the Saturn return happens every about 29 to 30 years in your chart, depending on where Saturn was at in your chart when you were born, what signs Saturn has to go through when and everything. But around the 29-year-old mark, 30-year-old mark, you're going to experience your Saturn return. And for most people, that is a time when they, for the first time, truly realize the limitations of life, where suddenly it becomes apparent, okay, I have to deal with the consequences of my actions. Life sets boundaries that I cannot get past, be it a sickness that I can get around, be it consequences for actions, be it having to grow up and start your own life finally. It can be so many different things, but Saturn really will come and say, okay, here's reality. Life has boundaries and you got to deal with them. And you have to set healthy boundaries. You have to live with the limitations that life gives you, and you can't get around it. Sometimes there's a wall that you can't get around. You have to deal with it. You have to face it, right? That is the Saturn return. And that's the archetype of Saturn. Having talked about this and the need for structure in life, we see that in the signs that Saturn rules. The first sign that Saturn rules is Capricorn. Capricorn is the goat that lives in the mountains, and it goes up the mountain. It finds its path to the top where the grass is found. It needs to go higher and higher to find more grass and more food. And then it remembers the pattern that it had to go the next day. And it basically becomes a master of the mountain that it lives in. So that's the kind of establishing and mastering energy of Capricorn. Also, Capricorn is considered the sea goat, like half goat, half fish or whatever. And it comes out of the ocean and establishes itself on land. So that's the energy. It's the upward energy of structuring and creating something that then you are the master over, that you have mastered. That's Capricorn. And Capricorns are always happy to share their wisdom with people if they're asked. It's very practical wisdom that they have. It's street smarts, basically. And of course, the flip side can be that, let's stick with capitalism. If you focus in capitalism only on your own position and establishing yourself, then unfortunately the rest of us might suffer because you're not giving us a chance to establish ourselves too. You are creating mastery over others, which in that case is a bad thing. The second sign that Saturn rules is Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is again a co-ruled sign. We have Aquarius being ruled by Saturn, and on the other end, in modern astrology, we have Uranus to rule Aquarius, and we will talk about Uranus next time. The Saturn aspect of Aquarius is kind of the continuation of Capricorn. When Capricorn, we got the establishment, we got the mastery, and like I said, if that stays there and it doesn't move forward, it doesn't, what's been established is not then passed on to the rest of us, then that individual or that group or whatever that has established itself is basically just controlling everyone else. And that can be very bad. And it can, energy can be funneled upward, wealth can be funneled upward, power can be funneled upward. I talked about that in the Pluto episode at length. You can see that episode 2. It's going to be up there. Then, yeah, we have a problem because the majority of people that are not at the top are going to suffer, right? So what we then have in Aquarius is that whole principle being taken, and Aquarius as the water bearer has the pot, the water pot with water, and wants to pour out good things and life and freedom onto the people, onto the community. That's Aquarius's desire. Aquarius has the desire to take wisdom, knowledge, and established life and power and whatever there is that Capricorn has brought into the storehouse of its own mastery. And Aquarius wants to take that now and spread it, wants to bring it to everybody. And that requires structuring as well. It requires dealing with systems. Established systems is a big thing for Aquarius, that Aquarius can see these established systems and kind of restructure them in their mind. It's an air sign, where a Capricorn is an earth sign. Restructuring in their mind and then thinking, okay, how can we use this now to benefit everybody? How can we use what's been established before, restructure it, and make it work for more people? Make it better. One quote or one thought that Aquarius might have frequently is, we're doing it this way, but we could do it so much better. Politics are this way, but if we would do it this way, then it would be so much better. So they kind of have a sense for what needs to be improved, what needs to be changed. That's why also the Uranus aspect is so important in Aquarius. Aquarius can be very intellectual, doesn't have to be though. They can be very practical too. They can even be very social sometimes, but always with the kind of energy that comes around like, okay, what's the established systems here and how can I make them better? What can be better here? How can we go forward with this progress, right? So where Capricorn is the establishment of systems, then Aquarius is the progress of systems. I would like to know where your Saturn is, how your Saturn return was, what you've learned, and yeah, let's talk about all these things. And I appreciate you watching. Have a great day. Bye.